Yo, this is Imani Sits, creator of Peep Game Comics. You're watching the Black Comics universe live on the Experience. You can check us out on all DSPs at the_EXP. Please follow, subscribe, click the notification buttons on all your platforms, whether it's Twitch, YouTube, and other platforms. Of course, I'm your host, Imani Latif, creator of Peep Game Comics. You can check us out at peepgamecomics.com. That's Peep Game Comics with an X. The Peep Game Comics is a website dedicated to Black comic creators and their work, comic books, graphic novels, anthologies, and the like. We have a special guest this evening. It's Jamar Nicholas, creator of my man. All right.
Yo.
We go, man. Look, it's not just you, because just before you came on, I had to scramble to get a signal to do this interview. You see this flimsy curtain here. I'm in my wife's line. I'm putting this together with duct tape, bro. So
yeah, I don't know what happened. It's one of those things like you know, you're on the phone and on Zooms all day long, and then
then one day
good stuff, right? What is necessary doesn't want to act right.
Yep, exactly.
But
so we're gonna get right into it, because it feels like we're on borrowed time. We need to hurry up and get this done. So no, but see, you got your drink and everything. I don't have a coffee or nothing, because that's what you were famous for. Coffee time with JN. He does
right, bro.
My bro does a lot of podcasts, live streams and stuff like that. And you have to forgive me. I get into the habit of going right into like casual conversations with folks, because I forget that like people, I know the people I'm interviewing, but people don't know who the heck I'm talking to sometimes. So if you could give people your 30-second elevator pitch as to who you are and what you do.
Sure, thanks, Imani. My name is Jamar Nicholas. I'm a Philadelphia born and bred cartoonist, illustrator, and educator. I've been in the game for over 23 years. Some of my greatest hits include my webcomic, Detective Boogaloo Hip Hop Cop, that I started doing with the filmmaker Kevin Smith back in the early thousands. Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun, which is a book that I adapted from the memoirs of Jeff Canada. And my newest book, Leon, Protector of the Playground, which won the Dwayne McDuffie Award for Diversity in 2018, which I just parlayed into a multi-book deal with Scholastic. So thank you. So right now I'm working on Leon the Extraordinary, which is the book one in my Scholastic series, which will be out this time next year.
So you're like the perfect person to talk to, because I've been noticing in these interviews and when I do Facebook Lives and stuff, I'm speaking to a lot of new comic book creators that are just now getting into this. I guess and I teach comic book classes, so it's weird. I've been getting it from all these different angles. I've been talking to young writers trying to create a comic. I've been talking to kids trying to, from the artistic side. So it's weird. I'm trying to um, narrow this conversation a bit because I started following you in the '90s with Detective
that's
Boogaloo.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because what was interesting was I'm in the Midwest. I'm in here in Toledo, Ohio, and it's
Glass
hard
City,
to.
what up?
That's right. That's right. You know what's up? Um,
Sip of tea.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's hard to get your hands on what a lot of black folks were doing in comics in the '90s, and it's sort of like I was constantly online. I was in college at the time. It was like so I'm bouncing between what you were doing in web comics, but I'm also looking at what the Love brothers, Robert Love and them, what
Hmm.
was doing on Zuda, was
Hmm.
doing Chocolate Thunder with their website.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of stuff. If you search hard enough, you can find little pockets of stuff that people were doing back then, and
Hmm.
you were just getting now. It seems like you've had your hand in every single aspect of independent publishing, and I wanted to see if you could like sort of like lay out the landscape back then as far as publishing and independent publishing and web comics.
Okay, sure. And that's a great place to start because it's like the worlds are completely different from where I came
Yeah.
from now, right?
Hmm.
To tell somebody in 2021, yo, you don't know how much of a wasteland it was before Google was around. Nevertheless, the internet,
Right.
how everything just kind of changed from there. Well, when I started self publishing, my first project was the Jamar Chronicles in '98. Um, there was there was the internet, like I'll say that with quotes. There was the internet. It was more like message boards and Prodigy and AOL and kind of like bulletin board services. The
Hmm.
internet hadn't really, it kind of existed, but you had to, if you were one of those families that happened to have a computer in their
Hmm.
house, it just seems like everybody has that now. These things were rarities back then. um, a lot of my early foray into self-publishing came from marketing, trial by fire, going to the library.
Hmm.
There were a couple of really important books. I have them over here. I feel if I move, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Uh, I had a couple of really seminal books that talked about self-publishing comics, and there weren't a lot of them. Right?
Hmm.
There was kind of like there was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and then a
Right.
lot of air in between.
Hmm.
Right. And as we both know, that book was dope, and almost every cartoonist has that on their shelf, but it doesn't teach you how to get into the business.
No.
Right. So I started, I realized I didn't have a lot of places to go. So I started with just going to the bookstore, going to the library. One of the first books I found was called How to Self Publish Your Comic Book by Tony Caputo.
Okay.
This book is really out of date now. They talk about
Mm.
fax machines. They talk about dial-up modems. They talk about dot matrix printers, and having a file cabinet in your office to put your
Mhm.
things, like a literal file cabinet. But really, what it did was it kind of unlocked the secret code of how comic books get made because up until then, you're just kind of guessing, right?
Mhm.
Okay, well, obviously somebody prints them. Obviously, they come out on a schedule. I don't really know much about distribution, so I kind of had to learn all that on the streets. That book was important. There was another. It was a comic book actually that came out. I forget what year. It was called uh, the How to Self Publish by Dave Sim, the Cerebus artist.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've seen it, but it was a floppy comic book. It was probably like 22 pages, and it was all text. And it
Hmm.
was basically Dave Sim basically trying to tell you not to go into comics. It was like
Right.
it was like a swerve. It's like these are all the reasons I wish I never did this, and I'm
Right.
going to try to stop you from making the same mistakes that I did.
I find myself stopping myself too, or at least
Yeah.
I find myself saying sometimes uh, I stop myself from saying that there's no money in comics. Like I stop myself from some of the realities that I've learned. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of hate it when I hear creators say, "Oh, you got to do it because you love it, because there's no, you're not going to get paid." It's like I don't. It's not that I'm. I don't want to be overly pessimistic,
Right.
but I do sometimes find myself trying to make creators be more realistic as to what their plan is coming
Yeah.
into comics.
Yeah.
Uh, did on that? Did you the way you approached, creating comics? Was this all a part of a plan, or was it sort of like you came up with stuff by chance, trial and error?
You know what? Really, it came from, and it's. I don't want to go too far back into the archive, but I wanted. I started. I always wanted to be a cartoonist. That was my
Yeah.
main thing when I was a little kid. I always wanted to be a cartoonist, but I wanted to do comic strips.
Right.
I was a early lover of the newspaper comics, the Sunday funnies, whatever you want to call them, and that spoke my language. And I kind of got into comics later. There was a point where if you had told me about Steve Ditko versus Buscema, I didn't know who those people were.
Mhm.
I was one of those guys who didn't know who Kirby was until he was dead. Um, because that wasn't my language, that wasn't my world. And I kind of got into comics after I realized, well, first I kind of washed out of trying to get a syndicated comic strip. I went through all those channels and I made packets of batches of comics,
Mhm.
comic strips, and send them to the syndicates. And I still have those rejection letters around here somewhere. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, maybe comics is easier. Comics is easier than doing comic strips because at least I have 22 pages to tell a story
Right.
rather than having set up, punchline, set up, punchline.
Right.
So I started experimenting with one of the colleges. I've always worked at universities. One of the colleges I worked at that I didn't go to, mind you, I just worked there. I started doing comic strips in their paper, in the school paper.
Mhm.
And I did that for like 2 or 3 years, and that was like my test kitchen. They gave me a full page or a half page, and every week I had to drop something. You
Wow.
know what I mean? So this was kind of like my first foray into like telling longer form stories, and
Mhm.
also in this big format, right? It was everything was horizontal, 11 by 17, and just get it in there.
Mhm.
So I could put 1,000 panels in it. I could do one big image. As long as it was there on Monday morning, they didn't care what I
Right.
did. So that I kind of got the bug to do comics through these little experimental projects I was doing. Trying to figure out my pacing, my timing, what kind of stories I could tell, and the engagement of the readers. That was the biggest thing. The students don't like anything, but once in a while somebody would come by like, oh, yo, your strip was hot. I was like, yeah, that's what's
Right.
up.
Right.
So that kind of spurred my interest into doing comics from there. And that's something, Zamani, you may be the first person I told that to. I don't talk about that
Oh
connection a
yeah.
lot.
No, no,
So go ahead.
no. I think that's from the conversations I've been having. It feels like that's what some of that seems like the biggest thing that I see missing
Mm-hmm.
from the conversation. Right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
a lot of the conversations that I've been having is like they talk about the script, they talk about printing, they talk about all these the logistical type stuff, the
yeah,
business side,
yeah,
and the art. When they say, okay, what about the artist? And then they say, okay, all you got to do is go to. They show the kids these. I'm calling them kids because I'm old. They show
yeah.
them Facebook groups, and Fiverr and Deviant Art, and it's like there's something about it. It's like maybe you should start by making a comic, even if you don't
Yeah,
know how to draw. It is something about the art form that
yeah.
seems to. It was something about it that it felt like the process was doing a disservice to the art form. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't put my finger on it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it
Well,
maybe because, yeah, go ahead.
even to bring that up is
Yeah,
interesting because if somebody's approach to thinking about comics is, I just need to find a guy to draw it, seems
right.
like you're already not all the way cooked.
it's some yeah. It was
You
just
know what I
something
mean?
of yeah. It was just
And
something about it.
I don't know if it's the and I don't want to get any of your your viewers upset, but there's always been a little bit of a tug of war or a war of attrition through comics between writers versus artists, right?
Yes,
Or
yes,
the writer artist or the artist writer or a
right,
cartoonist does both, or what about a
right,
mainstream guy who's just a penciler
right,
and an independent that does all of it? Like there's these little camps
right.
of attitudes and ways of looking at the business depending on
Hmm.
who you talk to. So, say a writer who is just like, "Yo, I had this idea, I just can't find anybody to draw it," is
Right.
already kind of not understanding the balance and the relationship between a writer and an artist, and they
Right.
need to. Right, and you're totally correct on thinking something smells fishy because like they're kind of a little uneducated about how all this stuff works from
Yeah.
the gate. They haven't even done anything yet.
Yeah. And even on the flip side, I've been noticing the artists that they find seem to they're artisans. They're there to do the job. So
Yeah.
um, it's just such a bizarre approach. And because you were actually saying you were comparing your process, the tools that were available back then,
Mm-hmm.
comparing those tools to what's available now. And you said something weird. You said like you weren't even sure if you could pull it off now. What was it about? What's so different about now?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and Imani's referring to we talked off camera a little while ago, and I said
Yeah, yeah.
if I had to start if I got the bug that in
Right.
2021 I would have do comic books. I don't
Right.
think I'd do it.
Mm,
I think there's easier roads to travel down, especially now. I mean, the people's attention span is like that fast.
right.
Trying to get an audience and keep it is
Mm,
really hard. What platform are you on? Do you need to be on one of these paid web portals? Do you need to be like, oh, do a webtoon? Do you need to do this? Do you need to stand out in front of the laundromat in your neighborhood and sell mini comics out of your trunk? You know what I mean? It's just
right.
that there's so many spokes in the wheel now. It's a
Right.
miracle that anybody can start now. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
But also at the same time, we're flush with opportunity. You
Yeah.
know, I always cringe a little bit when people say the thing. You know what? You could be a cartoonist if you have a pencil and an idea. I'm like, yeah, it's a little harder than that.
Right.
I don't want to sell anybody short, but it's a lot, right? And you
Yeah.
do have to have a plan, and that's kind of
Right.
why we're here, right?
No, no, no. Yeah, exactly why we're here because um what I've learned is sort of like I've picked up different templates as to how people have found success, and
Mhm.
everyone's map is a little bit different.
Totally.
So that's not
Okay.
so it's not it's really not to knock the what tends to be the typical writer's approach to creating comics, because
Right.
have seen some independents actually find a really good artist to really tell a really good story. So it's not that the the um the business plan is totally wrong. It's just that
Right.
I've noticed some very drastic differences from an artist's approach, a cartoonist approach compared to
Hmm.
a traditional comic book illustrator's approach,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
superhero illustrator approach compared to somebody like an Art Baltazar or something like that,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I tend to love actually.
Yeah.
I was wondering what was it about comics or cartoons, I should say, or
Hmm.
creating all ages stories that drew your interest compared to others type of storylines.
I think a lot of that stems to me being, I've really want to protect imagination, and I know that sounds really corny, right? For a
No, no,
bunch of people who live in their heads, right,
right.
and have a shelf full of action figures of things that don't really exist.
Hmm.
To talk about imagination makes people uneasy, right? Because that sounds very childish all of a sudden, right? But I think our imagination is what keeps us running, right? And what keeps you being a big kid or, you want to feed your inner child, however you want to spin that. It's just kind of like channeling your imagination. And what I dig about doing kids stuff or all ages stuff, because I've done, adult things and things like that, is that there's a million people telling those stories. And I find like my voice can be used in a different way to, which I think is even more important, try to bring new readers into the hobby, right? I think every year we get a little further away from kids wanting to read at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, with now Disney Plus has everything popping. The movies, video
Mm-hmm.
games looking real. I used to say that, yo, that look real, right? Like, cause I'm like, we're Atari kids.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I'm saying? And like my basketball wasn't 2K. It was the red stick versus the blue stick with the white
Right.
square in the middle. And you
Yeah.
still had to use your imagination
Mm-hmm.
to play those games. So anyway, I think it's really important that I'm feeding new generations of readers with stuff, and then they can go off and read Batman or Flash or whatever they're into. But I think that pipeline is really important to protect. So I've kind of taken it upon myself to do work like that. Another
Mm-hmm.
part of that, Imani, is when I was a kid, there weren't a lot of us around, right?
Right.
There wasn't I wish you were around when I was a kid to teach me a dope workshop on cartooning on Saturdays.
Right.
I would
Right.
have eaten that up, right? But that
Mm-hmm.
stuff was really few and far between. So I want to make sure that they see faces like us. They
Yeah.
see faces like us that are successful and run businesses and do things the right way that they may want to aspire to. I think it's something really special about a kid that wants to tell stories using pictures and
Yeah.
words. But, having an outlet to do that as a grown up is really hard to maintain.
I've noticed there's a huge demand for it,
Yeah.
and I find it interesting that um, not a lot of creators are even creating anything for that audience. Like the
Hmm.
events that I typically go to is so interesting. It's like most creators always get approached by a parent, first a parent in particular, bring
Hmm.
their young child and then saying, "Do you have anything for a 10-year, 12-year old?" And like mothers are very specific.
Yeah.
I want a superhero book with a
Hmm.
with a young black boy that's positive role model. Do you have anything like that? And then what I've noticed is that most creators have very dark material
Yeah.
and they want to tell darker stories. And most of us all came out of the vast majority of creators came out of the 90s. So like
Hmm.
they're making image books
Right.
basically. And
Right.
so it's I find it very interesting. It's like when those parents come to these events, they rarely find books for their kids. And sort of like it's
Hmm.
actually touch and go. So I was
Hmm.
trying to so even though I enjoy making all ages comic and all ages work, it's sort of like it was with an intention as well. So like from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
like I see
Yeah.
the demand here. I want to make
Hmm.
books for that audience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really scary to think about. Like, let's zoom out and think about the time before the pandemic, the before times, as I like to
Yeah.
call it. And you go to a comic book convention and you see a lot of parents bringing their kids, or maybe the dad is really into comics and he's dragged his family to it. That's kind of like the real rap, right?
Right.
And you see, there really shouldn't be a reason the kids should be bored at a comic book convention,
Right.
right? But
Mm.
there's nothing there for them. Not to say that you need a balloon animal artist or something like that, but it's kind of like, why is it so hard to think that you can't find that you can find stuff that you can hand your kid at a comic
Hmm.
book show? But it's hard.
Yeah.
So, kind of like a plug for my one thing I do, the Kids Love Comics uh, group that I'm a part of, that we set up at like some of the major conventions and have kids programming for the weekend. We
Hmm.
have workshops, all ages. cartoonists are in an island around each other, so parents or whatever can just come right to us and
Right.
go, oh,
Right.
here you guys are. This is what I was looking for, rather than
Right.
like filtering through a bunch of people with like blood claw books
Right.
or whatever, bloody
Right.
chiclet teeth comics, you know.
Yeah.
But
Right.
but really, I think that's a failing of our industry. It shouldn't be that hard, and it doesn't have to be either or. It can't.
Right.
It's got to be something in the middle of Dark Knight Returns and Archie. You know
Right.
what I mean? Because I know a lot of older fans are just like, well, that's corny or that's kid stuff, or my Wolverine has stubble on his
Right.
forearms. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I mean, that's a whole other examination, but I think that's a really important ley line that we need to protect in the
You know,
business.
to that, it's so bizarre. Just
Yeah.
before the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
It's interesting. You have made this huge announcement that you were cutting back on your con visits, right?
Yeah.
And I was cheering you on because I'm such a rebel. I'm constantly sort of like, I'm not necessarily someone who sort of buys into sort of what I consider to be con culture, as far
Yeah.
as selling books or building an audience and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I wasn't, although I enjoy cons, it was something about it that I was sort of adverse to as far as selling books. I
Hmm.
was like, I'm not a huge pitch guy. Not to say I'm not, like, when I'm at a table, don't get me wrong. When I'm at a table, I'm always on my feet.
Yeah.
I'm all, I'm engaged with folks. But as far as actually selling the book,
Hmm.
I was kind of adverse to the uh, the grind of going to conventions, and
Hmm.
I remember how you were cutting back. You were, focusing more towards your audience. Lining up stuff with schools and
Hmm.
educational opportunities, and um, I want you to, basically we could talk about, your logic behind that decision, because you were one of several professionals that were looking to make that decision of, pulling it back.
Hmm. I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the things that really spurred that on, and I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues, you included, because we talk a lot about this stuff,
Hmm.
is like we kind of got into this game knowing that there was a certain road you go down, right? And no one really told you you're supposed to do it. You just kind of follow the pack. Okay,
Right.
you want to do comics, you make a comic, you get it racked at the comic book shop. Then I guess you go to a convention and you
Yeah.
pull this crap out of your trunk and you set up and you sit there for 3 days and eat bad food and maybe make your hotel back.
Hmm.
And then you do it the next weekend,
Yeah.
and you're not, and it's kind of like, I almost thought of it like kind of like hand to hand drug dealing. You know what I mean? It's like you're just standing there waiting for somebody to show up
Yeah.
and hand you some money. And it's like,
Hmm.
it's for me, and I can't speak for the industry. I don't think it's just, I'm better or whatever. I was starting to see the product that I was having in the kind of fan that comes to a show may not be there to see me, right?
Hmm.
People talk all the time about how Comic Con culture has shifted so far away from comic book creators.
Right.
If you ever go to New York or God forbid San Diego, the artist alley is in the way back of Comic Con,
Right.
and somebody is like day 3 and out of money by the time they get to artist alley.
Right.
You know, so it's like, why are you there then? Really,
Right.
and we're too old to just say I'm just going to go. Like that's a young man's game. That's a part of comics that's a
Yeah.
young man's game.
Hmm.
So with me in this content that I've been doing with the kid stuff and understanding that my audience are libraries, the
Hmm.
teachers, they're school age children, they're even bigger than that. They're the superintendents of a school district,
Hmm.
right? So rather than, I guess what I'm getting to is like, rather than thinking so like incrementally, 1 book, 2 book, 3 book, how can I
Right.
sell 200 books or 300
That's
books?
I want to I want to I want to talk about that,
Yeah.
because I've shifted my target like that as well. Like it
Mm-hmm.
used to be. It's interesting how I think a lot of us, when we start off in comics, we think we are creating this book for one reader
Right.
or a particular type of reader,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But ironically, I found that most indies that do are the most successful, they shift their target from the audience to the retailer.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've noticed like the biggest indie comics right now, um, they have found a niche in comic book retailers are fans of their book. So
Yeah.
Berserker works because comic book store owners like that book.
Right.
Um, a lot of what Boom Studios and Aftershock is doing is popular because the shop owner digs that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so because they dig it, they buy it.
Right.
But I think and again I keep going back to the 90s. We thought that comics was this whole we wanted to be Rob Liefeld, who was, he created a comic book and then you had droves of folks,
Yeah.
lining up and kids, and he was friends with Easy E of all people and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Because we thought it was like instead of us creating a book that we knew the shop wanted, we were creating a book that we thought these millions of fans wanted, or
Right.
and but I find that the most successful creators have shifted their audience. So even me,
Mm-hmm.
I find myself doing things because I want a teacher, or like you were saying, a superintendent, or
Mm-hmm.
someone who's ahead of. I'm doing something with the city now, for
Yeah.
instance. And those people see what I'm doing and say, and then they're coming off. They're not buying a $5 comic book, right? I read like for instance, I have a friend that runs a nonprofit through ProMedica, the
Mm.
hospital program here in our city. And she
Uh-huh.
works with barbershops and stuff like that. She does, health programs out of barbershops and everything.
Yeah.
She came to my table and bought 30 mini comics
Mm-hmm.
because she was going to take those comics and leave them at barbershops all over the place. And so,
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, but like it's like a different. So
Yeah.
like not a lot of creators step into it with that in mind.
Right. It just, to speak to that for a second, I think to examine the mind of a comic artist or a self-publisher or whatever kind of creator you are. It's hard to get out of your own way and think about beyond the X's and O's or the dollars and cents of it. You know,
Right.
from doing a show a weekend to how can I move more of these books? Am I
Hmm.
even am I even pointed in the right direction? Like I also teach. I haven't taught this class in a while, but before the pandemic, I taught writing for comic books at Drexel University here in Philly,
Hmm.
and the class is more about the relationship between a writer and artist, which is like a secret handshake in comics that we
Right.
all know. A lot of people don't know about that. But I said, rather than thinking so broadly about superhero stuff, there's nothing wrong with cape books. Say you have this book about a coffee guy. He turns into a pot of coffee or whatever, and he flies around and he pours hot water on people's heads. I don't. It doesn't matter. Whatever this thing is, what kind of traction do you think you'd get if you sold it in coffee shops
Right.
versus trying to make the guy at the comic shop buy three of those? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
It's just like shifting your focus just a little bit off so you can see, like, our buddy Tim Fielder was really great at that. When he would post pictures, he'd be in Harlem selling Maddie's Rocket in front of
Hmm.
the Apollo
Right.
just because he's standing there. You know what I mean? And
Right.
that there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nobody saying you can't do it. But I think
Right.
there's some stigma in comics that you have to go through these channels, and if they
Right.
don't work, then I guess you didn't make it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Exactly. Hmm.
And like the audience is there, you just got to go find it.
Right. And then So, and to that, how much of it, because we're talking a lot of, it's almost like I can't, sometimes I fall into these things where I'm not sure if I'm talking about comics or am I talking about some type of business theory and all this kind of stuff. And it's sort of like, how much of it, your success now or just over time, has been due to like creative planning versus actual talent?
I think there'd be some people that would really want to hear the answer to this.
Right.
You know what? I really want to say some of the secrets to my successes, and I'm still trying to make it like everybody else, is networking. I think networking is underrated, and I think networking is underappreciated, especially in our circles where, and if the proof is in the pudding, one like on my podcast or whatever, we'll have some hot top tier comic book artists guests, and people are like surprised that somehow I would happen to get these people, and like there's these tiers to even knowing people. Like, how do you know him? How did that happen? Because I network and I've been around for 25 years. That's why.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So like those things pay forward, and they bear fruit in their own way. Right. But if there's kind of like a stigma that people kind of stay in their own little clubhouse. No shots to clubhouse. I haven't even been on that platform yet.
I've dabbled.
I have an Android. I can't even get on it. But but people stay in their pockets and either look up at people on a different ladder rung than them as like, oh, well, how they do that, or they look down on people below them, and kind of lose sight of actually moving forward themselves, right? So if your idea is, I'm going to go to San Diego Comic-Con this year just to network. I'm not trying to get a table. I'm going to have some stuff and some business cards, some stickers or whatever in my bag, and I'm going to every lobster dinner I can with Robert Kirk just to kind of like get my face out there,
Right.
I guess you could look at that as being kind of like a climby or platformy or faking, but I think it's all how your personality works, because everybody's here to meet people, to make business arrangements, to network. But I think we're afraid to network for real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think it's easier to just be in awe of people who've been doing this for 30 years than to actually go talk to them.
Right.
If you've ever been in a thing and somebody's like, oh, look, there's so-and-so. But that's as far as it goes. Like, we'll go talk to them.
Right. No, it's interesting when I guess in the 90s, but like, I guess it's not so much now, but I would say about 10 years ago, when you typically would hear someone talking about the industry, they would resent the idea that it was about who you know. You know what I'm saying? They're sort of like, they would talk about how much they resented not being able to get in because people because people that were in, knew somebody. But ironically, even for indies, I'm seeing the same type of success due to who you know. It's like it's not so much of a bad thing as I guess we might have originally thought.
Yeah, I think there's just a weird stigma around networking. It's like by osmosis, people are supposed to know you're dope and come to your table.
Right.
With nothing else around it.
Right.
So, but like you kind of have to do the work. And I think that's where kind of like the things start to separate. It's like, yes, opportunities happen because of your networking, but there's also so many other parts of that. I think the easy thing is to say, oh, someone hooked you up. My man put me on. All those things are what I think people want to think about in a real base level about success. Oh, his man's in them put, but at the same time, you have to do the work. You have to sustain it. You know what I mean? It's like Junior Mafia. What happened to that clique? I only know about Kim. You know what I mean? You still got to do the work.
Yeah, you got to do the work.
You know, maybe little C's you got on, but what about the rest of those cats?
Right.
You know what I mean? So if your attitude is already kind of screwed up about being in the business
Mm-hmm.
and thinking that the only part of success is going through the door, you're not going to last long.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like even if somebody opens a door for you, you go through it. Now what?
Right.
You know what I mean? So like all of those little facets of it are also important. And then what do you do with your time in? Are you just gonna are you there because you're somebody's man
Right.
and that's it? Or are you like, great, I got this opportunity, I'm gonna run run to the goal line with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot of like cerebral parts of it. And it's and knowing somebody at Image is like the smallest part of it. Because
Right. Right. Right.
one other thing I'll say to that, Imani, is the older I've gotten and the longer I've been in the business, I don't make a lot of phone calls anymore. Like, who
Mm.
uses the phone? But it's kind of like, I'm not like, ooh, let me dial up so and so and try to get
Right.
get a gig. There's like a silent code almost in all of this where we have professional colleagues and you get the head nod, but you don't bother people about work.
Right.
I think people think that everybody's just making deals all the time, but it's just kind of like everybody's afraid when the phone rings. Like, whoa, okay, who is this and what do you want? And
Right.
that's
Right.
a
Right.
scary thing that I've been learning the last 10, 15 years. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where I think people start to think people switch up and things like that. And people start circling the wagons a little bit. But if you have a pure heart, right, and just try to do right by people, usually it comes back around. And I think a lot of the good feelings and vibes that even somebody like yourself gets because you're a good dude and you do good
Mm-hmm.
work and people have good experiences when they're around you, so that that creates fruit. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
No. 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 Definitely. Because um, and just to reset the room, as they say, I'm talking to Jamar Nicholas, creator of Leon, Protector of the Playground, soon to be available on Scholastic. Um, and I think I find that very interesting because people forget all these other platforms. It's sort of like, okay, I'm gonna make this comic book, I'm gonna get it to the comic book stores, and then I'm gonna have
Right.
a movie. It's like instead of right, um, it could just as easily be like my man Keith Cross. He put his book out through Rosarium. He was selling it on my website. He was selling it through his website. Now he is being optioned for a movie. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I don't think he ever stepped foot in the comic book shop. He was doing art shows.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He was doing exhibits. He
Yeah.
was doing all these non-traditional things. And to our conversation about cons, the
Yeah.
last time I was talking to an artist that he was into trap art,
Mm.
and he was like, "Oh yeah, I want to get into comics. I want to go do a Comic Con, and we're going to do this and this." I said, "You ain't got to go to no Comic Con." It's like I was seeing videos of these trap art shows, and it's sort of like
Mm.
what's it's typically like an art show in a strip club, and like you got some artists in the corner painting nude women. You
Yeah.
got actual tables of artists selling out work, and I was like, if you make a comic book for that crowd, you probably sell hundreds of copies. It's like your audience
Right.
is built in. You don't have to go chasing a new audience all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um, I got the weirdest question for you
Go ahead.
because I think I might be at this point. Um, I know you have an assistant,
Yeah.
and I've been interviewing a lot of folks that are at this level where they are working independently, but they have found ways to bring other people in onto the work that they do.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to talk to you about that because it's like I remember I brought you here to Toledo, and it's like,
Mm.
oh, I'm talking to your assistant via email. It's like, oh man, I think I'm at that point, man. I need to talk to somebody about assisting me. Like how, as a creator, like how do you know that you're at a point where you say, you know what, I need to bring in more hands to help
Hmm.
out with this idea?
I think that happens when you can't do it anymore. I really think, I really feel like if you, there's, you know what, Imani, I think we all think there's something really sexy about suffering,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Everybody wants to, talk about how much they bled for the craft,
Right, right.
right? He's like, don't you know, I pulled 4 all-nighters to get this book done, but why?
Hmm. Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess it really goes to the work smarter, not harder thing. But
Hmm.
cartoonists and just this business doesn't really reward that,
Hmm.
right? It's like, we judge people by the volume of work they've done over the years, not
Hmm.
necessarily the titles. I've been saying lately how many spines you have on a shelf is where people give you your credit these days, right?
Right.
So if like a lot of people have families, you have a family, like,
Hmm.
how are you actively going to get all this stuff done in a week or a month or in 8 hours? You kind of need some help,
Hmm.
right? I've seen, and once in a while, and not with you, but once in a while, I had to tell my assistant. And this is early on when we started working together. When I need you to contact people, just try to be real easy with them because they're going to be a little surprised that you
Right.
exist. Right. And that's it's a
Yeah.
weird kind of reaction. It's like, oh, hello, this is Sandra. Oh, where's Jamar? Oh, he's working. What can I do for you?
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
like
Right.
the whole like head spin thing happens. If you can get
Hmm.
past that, it's like, I'm not special. I just have somebody who can help me get some of the things done in the day.
Right.
Um, and really, and it's funny. I just had a workshop this morning, talking about that very thing about delegating and getting assistance.
Hmm.
It's not a magic trick.
Mm.
It could even be your cousin. Whatever. If you can find somebody that has an interest and can take direction and is not going to rob you at the
Right.
end of the month, to say, listen, you know what? I'll give you whatever. I'll give you $10 an hour. I'll buy you sushi, whatever. If you want to just come to the crib and help out every Saturday,
Hmm.
usually you'll have somebody that would be into that. There's some
Right.
young people that don't want to stand on a corner, and that may be
Hmm.
interesting to them. Another thing that I've been talking about lately, and this is a really good option for any of the creatives out there. I'm sure wherever you live, there's a college in your town.
Hmm.
uh, Call it the career office or the internship office or whatever they call it at that school, and say, hey, I'm a local business and I need an intern.
Hmm.
They'll fall all over themselves to set you up because they have kids
Okay.
on a wait list that need opportunities. But I think there's something about going, oh, that's the college, we don't go over there. But
Mm.
if you flip it and think about it as a resource, it's like there's a bunch of students in there who would probably, jump at the chance to get some
Hmm.
work experience. You know,
Right.
and just with something like that, the career office will probably have you fill out some paperwork as your business. What are you looking for? How many hours? What's the end result for the student? And then they place people. Um, Another little thing about that, a factoid, is thinking about assistants. You may need somebody administrative.
Right.
Check the emails, check the social media, you book the hotel, whatever. That's one
Hmm.
thing. A studio assistant who's actively drawing stuff for you, that's a
Right.
whole other thing. Like,
Hmm.
do you need help because you can't finish these pages? Or do you need help because you can't get around to making invoices for the things you've done? And people, they
Right.
keep asking you, what's the invoice, Imani?
Right. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
pay
Yeah. Yeah.
you. Just can you just sit down and send the W-9? Like,
Right.
you know, I guess like figure out what exactly the needs of your studio are, and then go fill them. My little thing about that with colleges, just because there may not be an art school in your area, it doesn't
Hmm.
really matter. It's even better to have business majors
Hmm.
to help with a growing studio, right?
Okay.
It's like, hey, you know what? I'm really bad at half of this stuff. What am I doing wrong? Or if I give
Mm.
you the shoebox full of stuff, can you figure it out? Oh
Right.
yeah, I figured this out in my data statistics class.
The class. Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Right, and you look like a star at the
Right.
end of the
Yeah.
year. You know what I mean? But everybody wins. You help them out. You learn some stuff because we're getting old. We don't know
Yeah.
everything anymore.
No.
And then and then you may set something up for later down the line. They may want to come work for you or work with you.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I really appreciate that because those are really good tips because people don't talk about it a lot. As far as it's sort of like you see like one of your favorite artists and you notice that he's churning out a lot of work. Well, it's like the only way he could possibly be doing that is because someone is helping him. It's like, I remember John Jennings told me one time, like he had his students do the flats for his work one time. It's like, I was like, man, that's free labor.
Right.
But it's a ton of work. Just the flats alone, I know it's like, that's a huge part of the job.
Yeah.
And we just assume that it's like this one person is just laboring, at this desk, bleeding these pages out, as opposed to like, but I keep coming across these interviews where it's like, yes, I do the pencils, and then my assistant does the, he cleans it up and does the backgrounds even. I was like, well, you got somebody that does your backgrounds, like all these books I got on perspective, on how to get the buildings right.
And that all goes back again to the suffering narrative. Like we respect that grind. Right. Look at the detail. Look at how he drew every shoelace in the boot.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I think once you get to a certain point, and this, the most important thing is just hitting your deadlines. And the stuff's due and you got to get it out the door, and then you do it again, But, there's nothing wrong with getting some help.
Well, on that, I'm running out of time. I'm just glad that we got through this bad boy, because it was a trial by fire today. We might have to do this again just because. Where can they find you on social media?
Thanks, man. I'm not super active on anything right this minute. I'm in the middle of my first deadline. But I'm on Twitter at Jamar Nicholas, one word. I'm also on Instagram at Jamar.Nicholas. You'd be surprised how many Jamar Nicholases there are in the world. And also, what else? Oh, then also, if you're interested, you can catch me out on Facebook, where I do my coffee break with JN videos, and also Pencil to Pencil, my podcast I do with Mike Manley and Brett Blevins.
Yep. Oh, and Patreon.
Oh, yeah, and hit me up with a Patreon. That's Jamar Nicholas.
All right. I appreciate you, man. This is Imani Latif, creator of Peep Game Comics. You've been watching Black Comic Universe on The Experience. That's _EXP. You can check us out on all platforms: YouTube, Twitch, Facebook. Find us, follow us, subscribe, and like us, share, all that good stuff. Thanks a lot, man. Yeah, all that. Appreciate you, man.
All right, you too, bro. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Yep.